Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Lean Process and Open Government in Detroit. Our host today is Tom Robbins, and Tom is joined by Amy Sovereign and Garland Gilchrist from Detroit, Tucker Severson from C-Click-Fix, and Ryan Mannion, who works here at Socrata. Again, thank you all for joining us today. Let's get started. Tom?
Thank you, Alita, and I appreciate everyone taking the time to join us today. And I want to especially thank our group of panelists that have joined us today. We've got a pretty broad group and hopefully lots of opportunities for discussion. So our agenda for today is we've got our introductions done. We're going to drop into some discussion. We've got a pretty broad set of questions that we've had opportunity to get feedback from the community and people attending on what they'd like to hear about, as well as we always have opportunities for additional questions. So let's go ahead and hop into our discussion. Amy, I guess why don't we start with you? Can you tell us a little bit about Improve Detroit and what you're trying to do with that?
Absolutely, thank you. So Improve Detroit is powered by C-Click-Fix, and Improve Detroit is the branding that we've given that technical mechanism here in Detroit. And basically there are three main components. There is a free mobile app that allows citizens or residents or commuters to submit a request to the city. There's a web portal, and that is allows our city employees to process requests. And also a resident could also use the web portal to submit a request as well if they didn't, for example, if they didn't have a smartphone but they did have internet access. And then there's also a data capturing system. So that by that mechanism we're really able to monitor our performance as it relates to the processing of our reported issues, how rapidly we're able to get those closed out, etc. So basically a citizen is able to report an issue via their smartphone or via the web, and we, the departments, are instantly notified and it's routed to the appropriate department per the back-end configuration of Improve Detroit. So here in the city of Detroit, we did a soft launch in early October 2014, and we started out with just one pilot service, and we worked with our forestry department and for putting on tree issues, and they were gracious enough to be our pilot service request. And at this time, today in April, we have 13 issues live on the system. We have several more on deck, but the way that we handle it is we roll out issues one at a time. And the reason we do that is we want to ensure that we have a solid process on the back end in order to manage and close out these requests. So, you know, the technical configuration aspect of putting a system up on, or putting a request up on the system, that's the easy part. The real work is ensuring that all of the staff in that department know their role and that they know their responsibility, and that we have a solid process in place in order to handle all of the requests in a timely manner, and we also obviously have to properly train all of our staff who will use the system. So if you want to go to the next slide, I believe the bullets were there. So when we get a department ready for go live, like I said, we kind of really concentrate on building the best process and the easiest way to get through all of those. But because we wanted to sort of test this internally before we publicly launched, we put together what we call our ambassador program. So it's our Improve Detroit ambassador program, and basically it was our internal test. So we invited our city employees to come and see us. We set up a series of breakfast tutorials, and so they would come in on a Friday morning and bring their smartphone, and we'd provide breakfast and show everybody, you know, how to download the app, how to use the app, and how to report issues. And then we sent them out into the wild and said, you go ahead and for the next 6 weeks, you use this system as often as you possibly can, and then we're going to survey you afterwards. So we got feedback just sort of informally through our networks and through our colleagues, and those who were using the system during that time period. But in addition to that, we put together a formal survey and sent it out to all of our ambassadors so that we could get some honest feedback about what they thought about Improve Detroit and what they what their experience was. Did they find it was easy? Did they find we were responsive, etc.? And so we were really able to get an honest look about its functionality and also our effectiveness in using this new technology.
No, that's great. Now, the good news is we actually have a pretty active audience, and I've got a couple of questions that are in. Could you, when you talked about an issue, what did you mean by an issue? Can you give some examples for those that are listening?
Absolutely. So some of the issues, you can build it to whatever your needs are. So C-Click Fix is, like I said, that's the underlying technology here. But for the city of Detroit, the issues that people currently can use their smartphone to report to us are potholes, illegal dumping, a clogged sewer drain, any kind of tree issue. So a city tree fell in my yard, a tree is blocking the roadway, running water in a home or a building, any issue with a traffic sign or a fire hydrant or a manhole cover, a water main break, traffic signals and traffic signs, abandoned vehicles, etc. So we've got quite a few that are available. So those are the city services that I was referring to.
And then when you said you needed another question came in around the department. So for example, like illegal dumping, you needed to make sure that the department was ready to handle the issue, like respond to it. Someone's trying to figure out, I think, what did you mean by kind of go live within a department?
So before a department goes live, we have an implementation guide that basically, and I'll get a little bit more into this, but there's a couple of things that they need to do preliminarily. Tell us what are the critical elements of information that they need up front to give them an understanding of the issue, number one. Number two, tell us who in your department is actually going to log into this system and use their computer to acknowledge and close out requests. Number three, can you handle the surge? Can your internal processes handle the surge that we expect you to get when you go live on the system? So, for example, potholes, perhaps before going live, they were receiving 90 phone calls per week. Now they're looking at more like 90 per day. So are they equipped to handle this? Does their capacity reach the demand? So those are the kind of things that we're looking for. And if not, we put together, and this lends itself to lean a lot, is put together processes for them to follow that will basically make it so that they can get through all of these requests and get them handled and get them closed out. And the other big training element is exceptions, handling exceptions, because since we don't really have a lot of control over what people put in, they might put in the wrong category, they might put in something under the wrong category just because we don't yet have that category, etc. And so our staff really needs to have an understanding of what their role is in contributing to the success overall of our objectives with this and in handling those types of situations.
Great. And then one other follow-on question that we just got in. When you talked about the Detroit Ambassador Program, how many people do you have in that? And is it a continuing engagement with the employees, or is it just a way to bootstrap?
No, it was just prior to our public launch. So it's over now. We did have approximately 100 people volunteer to help us out with that. And so we just put the word out and said, hey guys, we're going live with this in a couple of months. Who wants to help us test it internally? And we had a phenomenal response rate with that. Plus, we gave them food.
Wow.
So that helps.
Food is always good.
People like food.
And then, yeah, I love it. And then just to clarify before we move on, you had said, for example, that you went from like 90 issues a week to 90 issues, I think, a day. When you say issues, is that just people calling in and saying, hey, my water's out? I mean, how did you physically define kind of those issues?
That one I was using the specific basic issue was for potholes, and they were using sort of, the Department of Public Works had sort of a way to funnel in actual phone calls. So they would track those phone calls related to potholes, and I'll get a little bit more into, how relatively difficult it was to track down the right person to call regarding a pothole or any such service issue. But yes, once we opened this up and it made it easy to contact the city and easy for a resident to interact with the government, yes, the potholes people went from 90 calls per week to 90 issues being reported per day within Improved Detroit.
Perfect. So we're still getting some questions in, and we'll continue to track them. We did want to move on. So Amy, you've got a very active audience, which I think is fantastic. So if we hop on to the next question, what can city governments learn from the lean process? What things would you take away, and what things would you recommend that those listening should really know about the lean process and be able to use?
Okay, so lean is basically, it's a set of problem-solving skills and tools that are used to reduce process variability and to increase efficiency. So as it relates to Improve Detroit, the idea is to sort of design a process that does what it's supposed to do with very high reliability. And I always tell everybody, what you have to do is make it easy to do the right thing. If you make it easy, that's what you'll get. People will do the right thing. So, Lean and Six Sigma overall are, the focus really is on waste reduction and on reducing defects. And a defect can really be any sort of undesirable outcome to any process. So by reducing waste and reducing defects, you're saving time and thus saving money. And you're also increasing the quality of whatever it is that you're trying to put out. So the concept of lean was actually brought here by Mayor Duggan. After he successfully implemented a very robust culture of lean when he was serving as CEO at the Detroit Medical Center, and brought those, brought those concepts here to the city of Detroit once he was elected mayor. So it's new here. And yes, it's been, it was introduced a year ago, but in the lean world, that's still considered new. Any kind of big change, cultural change, takes a lot of times and a lot of iterations to sort of seep in and really make its effect and get, become an integral part of everyday culture. So lean itself was, primarily born in the manufacturing industry, but its concepts can be applied to the operations of really any municipality or any company. Data analysis is obviously a very important aspect of Lean and Six Sigma. And again, back to Improve Detroit, that does provide us with data. There's reports that we can easily monitor our performance and identify any issues and any trends. They're very simple, and our users can run them. So that's something that we're able to keep a really tight eye on in terms of our performance. City government can be as much of a victim of that's the way we've always done that. That's the way we've always done things. It was really any other industry. And, we've all heard that before. And so lean is sort of a way of taking a logical and very deliberate approach to analyzing our current processes, and then using the tools of lean, we can do a deep dive so that we have a very good understanding of our current state and our baseline performance, and then use additional tools of lean to sort of find the right set of changes that need to be applied. Generally, we try to apply them one by one so that we have some control over the process. But you use the tools in order to understand the process and make the changes that will improve the outcomes and meet your objectives. In terms of change management, that's the people side of change. That's the hardest part. So the strategy that lean employs for change management is getting people involved. You've got to set expectations. You've got to, establish trust. You've got to have these cross-functional teams where the communications are really open and judgment is checked at the door. You've got to quell people's fears about change. And then the other thing that I'm really big on is finding advocacy. So, if you have those sort of folks who are opposed to the change wholesale, sometimes those folks who are fighting you every step of the way can become your biggest advocate. Because if you can address their issues and quell their fears, chances are you can do that for anybody else thereafter. So those are the kind of people that you want to turn into advocates. The other thing with Lean and Six Sigma is you visualize things. So you want to visualize and communicate your goals and objectives. Show people the big picture. Here's where we want to be, even if it's conceptual at that time. And then visualize those wins and those successes along the way. And those are some of the strategies that we employ here in terms of change management and really kind of getting everybody on board with a new way of thinking.
No, I think that's great. We've got a bunch of questions in, but I think what I want to do is head to the next question, which I think will start answering what a lot of people are starting to chat with us about. Specifically, how is Detroit utilizing the Lean process to improve its outcomes?
Okay.
I know we talked a lot at the higher level, but I think people are interested in kind of hearing the next level down.
Absolutely. So it's been iterative. So the concept was first introduced in January 2014. Mayor Duggan was giving a speech. He was a Newsmaker of the Year, and he was giving a speech wherein he solicited volunteers from our local business community and just asked, hey, if you all want to step up for a minute and come in here and help us with Lean and getting this thing kicked off and off the ground, let us know. And we did. We had a bunch of companies offer to work pro bono for a series of 8 weeks on projects that we selected. So we focused on certain city services, and we basically called this our Lean launch. So those were the initial Lean launch projects that we worked with business volunteers on, and then also with our Lean department here. After those initial projects, we really started a pretty robust training program. And the training program is so that we can educate our internal resources here within the city, obviously so that we don't have to rely on business volunteers working pro bono. They can only do that for so long, right? So we're educating our internal resources here so that we can build up a critical mass of staff within the city who are certified in Lean Six Sigma. So the trainees, they go through approximately 80 hours of education. We're using a blended approach with both classroom and online training. And then they have a mentorship during their projects, and they do project work as part of their certification. So those projects that they're doing are our Lean Forward projects. So we have a few of us that are certified in Lean and many of us who are becoming certified in Lean. Some of the tools might be familiar to some of the audience today, or maybe not, but some of the things that Lean uses are things like process mapping, statistical process control, error proofing, like I discussed before, making it easy to do the right thing, failure modes effects analysis, which I like to call what could possibly go wrong. And then we also generally use the DMAIC framework, which that's an acronym, and it stands for Define, Measure, Analyze, Improve, Control. And that is the methodology that I spoke to briefly earlier, wherein you have separate phases for each one, each phase of this, the project is broken into each of these individual phases, and there are Lean tools associated with each one of those phases. So basically, this is an organized, common sense approach. We use data to drive our decisions. And like I said, the majority of the projects, we use the DMAIC framework. And in terms of Lean participation, right now, Lean is used by the departments that are interested in participating, basically. We work with the departments that volunteer to be part of the program. Yes, we want to do Lean, and we say, great, let's team up. I spoke briefly on change management earlier, and people react differently, and departments are going to react differently. So some are going to be early adopters, and some are going to be wait and see. So right now, at this particular moment, we're working with the early adopters. And the folks that want to wait and see, cool. They can wait and see, because once we prove that we can move the needle with the early adopters, those others that are waiting to see that will go ahead and want to join as well. And by that time, it should coincide pretty nicely with us having more green belts and more people who are certified in Lean Six Sigma. So while we're waiting for folks to decide that they want to join, we're building up that critical mass so that our capacity can meet our ultimate demand in terms of Lean.
Okay. And I guess one of the questions I just saw was on your, I think it's the Lean Forward projects. How do you determine projects? I mean, what bubbled up to the top and what didn't?
So our projects, generally, we really like to make sure they align with the strategic initiatives of the mayor. And then also, we, as I said, we work with those that are early adopters in the departments that feel like, you know what, we've been looking for some solutions to problems, for example, with this, for potholes or for traffic signs, et cetera. So we have people come to us and say, please help us. And those are generally, the strategic initiatives of the mayor are obviously city services need to be improved for the residents who live in the city of Detroit. And generally all of those have been in perfect alignment with those strategic initiatives.
Perfect. All right. Well, for those of you who have additional questions, feel free to send them in. What I wanted to do is switch a little bit, because I think one of the strategic initiatives is open data. So let's talk a little bit. Garland, I think maybe I'll direct this to you. Can you talk a little bit about why open data is important to Detroit?
Absolutely, and I'm really happy to be participating in this conversation. So let me start by giving the brief open data history of the city of Detroit and talk about why it's important. So in February of this year, Mayor Duggan signed the city's first ever open data policy into law, the executive order. And for folks that may not be familiar with that phrase, essentially what it means is we have begun in earnest to work toward putting out as much ostensibly public information and data that the city either generates or operates from as possible to the public free of charge in formats that are readable and understandable by humans, and also, and perhaps more importantly, processable by machines and software. And so we are doing that primarily through, at this point, an open data portal, which launched on the same day that the mayor signed this executive order into law. And the reason that's important to us is there's really a couple reasons. One is that these open data efforts for municipalities are often about transparency. And we believe that transparency for transparency's sake is important, but it's also important because we are working in this administration to really reestablish a level of trust and understanding and reset the relationship between city government here in Detroit and the citizens and businesses and residents that we serve. And we believe that being more open, more clear, more honest about what's happening, what are the quantitative facts about city operations, is a great way to reset that relationship. The second thing is that this really is meeting the expectations, frankly, for what it means to operate a city government in the 21st century. I would say that the open data movement, while it has been around for maybe 10 years or so, it's still really in its infancy. But this is really beginning to define how governments should function. And so we are wanting to be included in that number of cities who are realizing this vision for open data and transparency, and that's one of the reasons why we did this as well. And the third thing is that this really open data, it really enables better and more diverse partnerships for the city. So by way of example, if it's difficult to get information from the city government, it's often difficult for businesses or organizations to partner with city government for anything from economic development to research to help the city make better data-driven decisions and all sorts of things in between. But by having more information, more easily available, more publicly available, and more able to be used in the context of other projects or built upon, it really enables the city to be a better player and partner in the landscape. It really enables us to be a better participant in a lot of community conversations because our information can then have us all reading from the same menu, if you will. So now we have community groups all over the city who are taking advantage of the data we're putting out and using it not only to drive their decision-making processes in a hyper-local way, but also to hold the city accountable to the numbers that we're putting out. So for all these reasons, it's really important for us to have a solid open data policy in the city of Detroit.
Perfect. And then I'm going to hop into the next question, Garland, because we're getting people who are obviously very interested. Can you talk a little bit about how open data helps to improve your process and efficiency?
Absolutely. So so my role here at the city has been to work on improving data management more broadly in the city of Detroit. And the open data policy and the push for this from the mayor for this increased transparency and increased communication of data has really been a forcing function for better data management and better data sharing both internally as well as externally with the public. And if you're managing your data better, you are then able to more easily, it becomes more communicable. You can more easily share it with your colleagues in other departments and divisions who may need it. So our tax assessor's office can now more easily get information from our building safety and building permitting department, something that processes of information requests that took weeks now can take seconds. It also enables better decision making because if we're managing our data better, that means we can use it to gain more insight into our operations and better allocate the limited resources that are available to us. You know, as we are emerging from our bankruptcy, we're working with a pretty defined set of financial and people resources, and we want to make sure that those are deployed as effectively as possible. And better data management can lead to better analysis of the information and other operations that data belies. And then ultimately, better decision-making, more efficient decision-making that's based on this sort of quantitative analysis will lead to better service delivery. It can lead to make sure that we are plowing the right streets at the right time first, make sure that we are delivering from an Improved Detroit perspective, that we are able to find out where the hotspots are for certain types of requests and make sure that we can have as proactive an approach as possible to reduce the requests coming in and to resolve the ones that have come in as quickly as possible.
And so one of the questions that I often get asked, or that we get asked a lot, and I see it come in, is what would you recommend to people trying to get leadership buy-in around doing an open data program? Are there any techniques or tactics that you would recommend? Because it's always a big thing, right? Let's take on more work.
Absolutely. I would make two suggestions. The first is that for folks that are working inside of governments and want to see this sort of policy realized, is to think internally first. I know open data is about transparency, but one of the key ways to sell it to leadership is selling its internal value. So the value of having data more available, more clean, more communicable means that it can be better utilized more widely inside of the enterprise. So if departments have easier access to information, then by extension the public can have great access to information, and vice versa. So one, I would really sell it internally as a way to improve operational efficiency and communication inside of government. The second thing I would say is try, for the folks that are actually charged with implementing a data policy, try as much as you can to make the process of populating the open data portal or open data channels that you have as invisible as possible to the people who are already doing the day-to-day work. Make sure that they don't have to do an extra step, but that you have automation in place that will basically populate the open data portal for them.
Perfect. Now, I know we've got a lot of questions that are coming in, so I'm going to hold some. Let's move on to our next question, which, Amy, I wanted to ask you. Do you think technology can improve services without increasing costs? That's a pretty common question that we often hear.
Absolutely. Thank you. So, there are certainly costs associated with standing up a technology tool such as Improved Detroit. So really what you want to do is look at the big picture. So are the efficiency gains of a greater value than the cost of purchasing this tool and learning how to use it. So you really want to get a look at what are we going to gain versus what are we going to spend. So that sort of cost versus price. So for a metaphor, I have a son. He's rambunctious. And an 8-year-old, you can buy him a $10 pair of pants, or you can buy him a $30 pair of pants. So for the $10 pair of pants, if he gets to wear them for 3 months, but the $30 pair of pants, he gets to wear them for 9 months, what's the cost of me having to go out and buy another pair of pants? What's the cost of me having to send the child to school with holes in his knees, right? So you got to look at it from cost versus price. So back to the efficiency gains, we had to take a look. So are the gains, is what we're going to gain greater than the cost? And our answer here was a definitive yes. Implementing the tool of Improve Detroit, we saw a lot of reduction in waste. So a lot of reduction in waste related to information flow, because the time that it takes for a work crew to receive their work order has been reduced. So for one example of the departments that we were working with, previously what they had been doing was passing around a spreadsheet, and it housed all of their work orders. And this is how they worked. The spreadsheet, the call taker would log them into the spreadsheet, pass them up to the supervisor. The supervisor would add in any other sources of intake, add some more work to that, and pass that along via email. And when we're working all day in front of our computers or something, a spreadsheet passed through email might not get top priority, right? So when we really did a deep dive analysis into this, it turned out they would give it to the foreman the following day. That foreman was gone for the day doing their investigation and all of their other work out in the field, and then they wouldn't get it to the crew until the following day. So basically, those information flow issues were adding at least 2 days to the cycle time on every single one of those requests. Not to mention, we can circumvent some of the other issues related to information flow. I inadvertently deleted 4 rows off of this spreadsheet, and now we can't recreate them, right? So maybe perhaps lost work, or lost work in terms of lost paperwork for those departments that were heavily dependent on paperwork orders. The truck window was open and they flew out. We're going to drive back, and can you give us the work that you gave us earlier? So all of those efficiency gains are things that we took a sort of a very deep look into our current processes and what do we have to gain. So those are just a couple of examples. But the other thing is that since the information is publicly available, those folks that are receiving the phone calls every day, when you are a citizen and you put in a report through Improve Detroit, you're going to be notified via your email every time that that issue is updated. So you don't have to keep calling. So our folks that take calls every day saw a reduction in the calls that they need to take with people looking for the status of the issues that they'd previously called in. And so that frees them up to do some of their other required duties. So we're freeing up some of our labor as well. And that's not even touching on the fact that overall the citizen experience is better. Detroit doesn't have, for a couple years, a working 311 system, so it might have been very difficult to determine who's the right person to call. If I see illegal dumping down my street, who do I call? Do I call the mayor's office? Do I call the Department of Public Works? Do I call the police? Do I call the General Services Department? It could be a very confusing sort of thing to navigate for an everyday citizen. So, not only are we, making our citizens' experience better, but we also stand to gain all of these sort of efficiencies because we're using an automated system, and we're using a system that's publicly available and is transparent. The other thing that we also studied in relation to savings is having a deep understanding or a deeper understanding of the issue before we go out there. So since Improve Detroit, somebody can put in a picture. So our folks on the receiving end of that might be all they need to see, and they've got all the understanding of the issue that they need in order to send out a crew, with the right equipment and with, in the right time in order to take care of that. Previous to that, you might have been getting requests from letters coming in from citizens, phone calls coming in from 4 different places. So you never had a standardized intake set of information, basically. With this, with Improve Detroit, we're very careful to set up our standard intake questions so that our departments have the information that's critical to them prior to sending out somebody to investigate or somebody to fix it. So a good example of this, just to kind of bring it home, would be a traffic sign. So traffic signs, some are put in dirt, some are put in cement. And you need different equipment to repair those signs. So if a car hits a traffic sign and takes out a stop sign, we need to know prior to going out there what equipment we need to bring. We don't want to bring the big drill and the cement stuff if we don't have to. But before, what we would have to do is send an investigator out prior to. And now, if we get a picture of that and we know whether it's in cement, and even if we don't get a picture, that's one of our intake questions, we can send the crew out to do the job efficiently and with the right equipment the right time. So it saves some of those duplicate trips, it saves some of that redundant motion, etc. And then, we also have a way of, since now we're using Improve Detroit, we also have a way to track duplicate orders. So duplicate requests, if something's a hot topic, duplicate requests could inundate basically a department previous to this. Now, with Improve Detroit, they can go ahead and designate something as duplicative, and that way they don't have to, sort of keep processing the same request over and over just to make sure. So in terms of, the efficiencies gained, that's what we really wanted to do, was increase our standardization and reduce our process variability so that all of the gains, or that we gain that efficiency and thus save the money. And your return on investment, when you look at the numbers, is, for us anyway, we were definitely getting a greater return on what we invested in this particular technology.
Perfect. Now, a couple of questions came in. One of those is, when you kind of think about lean, can you talk a little bit more about leadership engagement and how to get leadership involvement or buy-in? That always seems, just like we had asked Garland on the open data side, that always seems to be a big question with folks.
Absolutely, and Garland, alluded to the fact that you really need to sell it internally, and that's that's definitely a good approach. So it's you want to frame it in the way that folks are going to understand what the benefit is to them and their department. It helps that we here in Detroit have Mayor Duggan. He's a strong advocate of lean. He's a believer. And that top-down approach is definitely encouraging for the department heads and the department directors. But yes, leadership support is crucial. And those in leadership roles were actually invited to take a short 4-hour educational seminar regarding lean and what it means to be a project champion. And within that 4 hours, we basically gave them information about what lean is, how it can benefit them, and then if they are to, initiate a lean project, what that means in terms of being a champion. So signing off on that project charter, helping to communicate, helping to quell any fears, providing, vocal and visual support of the initiatives. And so those educational seminars that we offered to our leadership, I think, were very helpful. And then the continued support of the mayor. And again, back to visualizing successes. If you can visualize that you've moved the needle, people want to be on board with that. You know, people overall want to be a change agent, but they don't want to spin their wheels. These are busy people, but if you can visualize those goals and objectives and the wins, then generally you're, 75% down the road in terms of your leadership support.
Perfect. So we'll go ahead and move on to our next question. And for those of you who are sending in questions, we'll make sure we can hopefully get to everything. But Garland, this question is directed towards you. How does Detroit evaluate and implement new technology projects?
That is a good question and a broad question that I'll try to put some scope around. But generally, we think about this in terms of two axes, or two metrics, or two indicators of whether a project is worth pursuing at this particular time. One, we want on all our projects to basically reduce the amount of friction it takes to deliver a service. So Improve Detroit's a really great example of that. For all the services that have been enabled and that will be enabled and accessible to Detroiters via Improve Detroit, the process of evaluating and reforming your process to respond to a request from a Detroiter for a particular service, by definition, by going through this lean processing framework, it leads to reduced friction in that service's delivery. It leads to a better experience for you as a Detroiter of not only making the request, but seeing the request through and then making sure that you see that the city has completed their response to your request and resolving it. And that's true of really any project we want to roll out. For open data, we really, at bottom, reduce the friction in the ability for us to respond to the multitude of information requests that we get from our citizens and from researchers and from businesses and from other governments. We're making it easier to deliver that service of information delivery. Another thing that we're thinking about when we're making technology project decisions is how does this enable better decision making, both quantitatively or qualitatively. So that's true both of internal systems that are not public facing, like better systems on financial management and records management and HR information systems, et cetera, like making sure that we have systems that make it easy for folks to do their job here in the government, or for folks to be able to make better decisions based on the information put in front of them. That's why we embarked on a humongous project to upgrade any and all out-of-date computer hardware that City of Detroit employees have been using to make sure that we all are on a level playing field from a hardware perspective, and therefore, and then also from a software perspective, to make sure we can better communicate with one another so we don't have issues of email attachments may or may not work for a given person given the software on their machine. This all leads to better communication, which leads to better decision making, and from better decision making it leads to better allocation of resources, and that better allocation of resources ultimately leads to improved service delivery that is a better experience for Detroiters. So that's really the rubric that we use, and there's a lot of opportunity for that here in Detroit, so it's a pretty exciting time.
Perfect. All right, so I know we're running a little bit over, so I apologize. What I'd like to do is, if you have questions, feel free to send them in. Tucker, are you still here? We didn't lose you, I hope. I have a question for you, if you're around. All right.
I am still here and unmuted.
Oh, perfect. All right, no problem. So Tucker, we had a question that someone sent in. So on the C-Click-Fix side, when you guys worked on with the Detroit folks, is this your typical type of implementation? And how do you guys think about internal processes and creating workflow around that when you're working with customers?
Yeah, so I think that more recently this approach of iterative improvement in rolling out either one department or even one request type at a time is becoming more and more common. And maybe it's because we've learned from the success of the Improve Detroit project and a couple others. The platform itself is very flexible in that you can start with one person or one department or one request type and grow as you get the support and the confidence around that. And I think that it's, especially things like an internal launch where you're getting staff to use the tools that they're going to be responding to are hugely beneficial.
Perfect. And then another question that came in, and as we start winding down, and Amy and certainly anyone else should jump in here. The question is, one of the core values of lean thinking is creativity before capital, so wits before wallet. And so there is bound to be strong opposition to thinking technology from the outset. How did you manage to position technology as being important in the lean scheme of things?
Well, actually, this lean was looped into the technology component of this particular project of standing up Improve Detroit after it was initially thought of. So I mentioned that we don't have a 311 system, and one of the mayor's strategic initiatives is certainly to make it easier for Detroiters to interact with their government. So this was vetted as one of the technology solutions that we wanted to pursue. And my phone rang when we looked at it and said, what are our risks here? And the risks associated with putting technology around a broken process is only going to increase the amount of issues and problems that you have. So you can't just take a bad process and make it electronic and all your issues go away. So that's when the Lean's bat phone rang, and they said, we're most interested in seeing how we can work with you to ensure that the processes for this technology are able to handle it. And so that was when we were looped in. Generally, no, with lean processes, we work with a zero budget on almost everything. So yes, so that is absolutely accurate. Generally, our projects are zero budget, but this one we were looped in order to ensure that we weren't just slapping a technology band-aid on broken processes.
No, and that's great. To follow up on that, what tools or analysis do you use to evaluate savings from your lean improvements and IT improvements? Do you have any types of analysis or tools you recommend to folks listening?
So generally, any kind of statistical analysis tool. We do not use, a lot of folks, if you're out there and you're lean certified, you may use Minitab. Some folks, just use Excel, and we do definitely use a lot of Excel. We also have, we received a grant from a company that has a statistical analysis tool. So really just making sure that you get it accurate, you're capturing accurately your baseline. And a lot of times there's a struggle even to establish any sort of way to capture data at all. In the absence of technology, a lot of that, those processes may be manual, so that can oftentimes be your first challenge is we don't have any data whatsoever, and you don't even know what your baseline is. So, but any kind of statistical analysis tool can be used, even something like Excel, as long as you capture data that accurately reflects your cycle time and that you're analyzing that and capturing, where you're moving in terms of your improvements and controlling your changes so that you know what's working and what's taking effect and what's not.
Great. Well, I want to apologize to my panelists that we're a little bit over. But I do appreciate you taking the time to spend with us today. I'm going to go ahead and wind down, but I did want to once again thanks to the folks from Detroit. Certainly thanks the C-Click Fix folks, and then obviously Socrata for kind of pulling this together and spending the time today to talk about not only Improve Detroit, but also C-Click Fix, the lean process, and Socrata. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and end today's webinar because we're a little bit over. But once again, thank you for joining us, and everyone have the great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.